Good day, everyone. Today we're going to discuss the steps in conducting a literature review. Now, before we go through those steps, let's first have a quick review of what a literature review is. Now, a literature review is a review of scholarly sources related to your research topic. Now, it allows researchers to examine what previous studies have already discovered, compare different findings, identify gaps in existing knowledge, and use those findings to support their own study. Now, in simple terms, before we conduct our own research, we first need to understand what other researchers have already done. Now, this helps us avoid repeating the same studies and gives us a stronger foundation for our own research. Now, you might be wondering, how do researchers actually conduct a literature review? Now, a literature review isn't something we write all at once. It actually follows an organized process. Now, as I was reading different research references, I found that while authors may explain the process in different ways, they all emphasize the same basic idea that writing a good literature review requires a careful planning and a step by step approach. Now, for today's discussion, we will focus on six essential steps that researchers commonly follow when conducting a literature review. Now, the six steps are: first, we have define the research topic. Second, we have search for relevant literature. Third, we have evaluate the sources. Fourth, read, organize, and synthesize the literature. Six, identify the research gap. And lastly, write the literature review. Okay, let's begin with the first step. Define the research topic. This step is very important because having a clear and specific topic makes the rest of the research process much easier. Now let's look at the examples on the slide. The first topic is simply social media. Do you think this is specific enough? Probably not, right? Why? Because it's too broad. If you search for studies using only the words social media, you will probably get thousands of results covering different fields and topics. Now let's look at the second example, the effects of social media addiction on the academic performance of college students. Now, this topic is much more specific, right? So it tells us exactly what is being studied. The issue is social media addiction. The outcome is academic performance, and the participants are college students. That's why we always remember the simple idea: the more specific your topic is, the easier it is to find relevant literature. Now, once you've clearly defined your topic, the next step is to search for relevant literature. Now, remember, the quality of your literature review depends on the quality of the sources you use. That's why researchers use academic databases instead of ordinary websites. Now, some of the most commonly used databases are Google Scholar, Gestor, Science Direct, ResearchGate, and ERIC. So these databases provide access to scholarly sources such as journal articles, thesis, and other research publications. Now, when searching, don't just type your entire research title. Instead, identify the keywords. Now, keywords are simply the main concept or important terms in your study. For example, if your topic is effects of social media addiction on the academic performance of college students, your keywords could be social media addiction, academic performance, and college students. Now, if you don't find enough results, don't worry, you can use synonyms or related terms. For example, instead of searching academic performance, you can also search academic achievement or student performance. Now, remember, the goal isn't to collect the greatest number of articles. The goal is to find the most relevant and reliable sources that are connected to your study. Now that we have found possible sources, the next question is, how do we know if these sources are reliable? That brings us to step 3. And the next step is evaluate the sources. Okay. Finding articles is not or is only the beginning. We also need to determine whether those sources are credible and trustworthy. Remember, not everything we read online is accurate. So, to evaluate a source, we use these 5 criteria. Okay? Currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, purpose. Currency, is the study recent enough to provide updated information? Relevance, does it directly answer or relate to your research question? Authority, is the author an expert in the field and was the study published in a reputable journal? Accuracy, is the information supported by evidence, data, and references? And purpose, was the article written to inform and educate rather than to persuade, advertise, or promote something? So, taking time to evaluate your sources helps ensure that your literature review is based on accurate and reliable information. Now that we have selected credible sources, we are ready for the next step. Okay? So, after collecting your sources, the next step is to read, organize, and synthesize the literature. Now, many students think that writing a literature review simply means summarizing one article after another. Actually, that's not enough. A summary explains what each author found. For example, um, Santos 2023 found, Cruz 2024 stated, Reyes 2025 concluded. So these statements are correct. But if we only discuss studies one by one, we're not showing how they are connected. So instead, we should organize the studies by grouping those with similar ideas. Similar ideas. Now, after organizing them, we synthesize the information. Okay, so when we synthesize, we compare studies and ask questions like, what do these studies have in common? How are they different? Do they agree or disagree? Are there any patterns? Are there conflicting findings? So a summary, again, looks like this example, while a synthesis looks like this. Several studies found that excessive social media use negatively affects academic performance. However, researchers disagree on whether this is mainly caused by distraction or poor time management. So, Notice the difference, people. A summary discusses studies separately. Now, a synthesis, it connects different studies to give you a clearer understanding of the topic. Now, once we have synthesized the literature, we are ready for the next step. Okay, finding what is still missing. Okay. Now, one of the most important parts of a literature review is identifying the research gap. Now, a research gap is something that previous studies have not fully explored or answered. Now, many students or many researchers think that finding a research gap means looking for a completely new topic. Actually, that's a common misconception. Most research doesn't create an entirely new topic. Instead, it improves existing knowledge by exploring something that previous studies have overlooked. So, a research gap may involve uh, different participants, such as studying college students instead of senior high school students, different research methods, such as using interviews instead of surveys, another unexplored variables like study habits or self regulation, and lastly, different locations such as conducting the study in local colleges in Davao de Oro instead of universities in other regions. Now, identifying a research gaps or gap helps answer one important question. Why does this study need to be conducted? Now, if your study addresses a gap in previous research, then your research has a clear purpose and justification. Okay? Now, after completing the previous steps, you're now ready to write your literature review. Now, a good literature review has three main parts. Okay? The introduction, body, and conclusion. Now, the introduction, it actually introduces the topic, it provides the necessary background, and explains the purpose of the review. Now, the body, it discusses previous studies by grouping them into themes or ideas. So this is where you compare and synthesize the findings instead of simply summarizing one study after another. And finally, the conclusion. It summarizes the major findings, highlights the research gap, and explains how your own study will contribute to the existing literature. Now, one important reminder is this: organize your discussion by themes, not by authors. Okay? Okay, so before we end our discussion or my discussion, I'd like you to think about this question. Among the six steps we discussed today, which do you think will the most challenging for you as a researcher and why? Okay, so take a moment to reflect on your answer, teachers, because understanding the challenges is also part of um, becoming better researchers. Thank you, everyone, and God bless.